Welcome to HisChem, a history show that takes a look at the science and technology world we live in. I'm Michal Meyer. I'm a historian of science and the editor of Chemical Heritage magazine here at CHF.
And I'm Bob Kenworthy. I'm a chemist and also on staff here at CHF. Our program today, Power and Promise. Whatever happened to our golden nuclear age? We have two guests today, Dr. Alex Wellerstein from the American Institute of Physics and Linda Richards from Oregon State University. Alex is a historian of science with a PhD from Harvard University and works at the Center for the History of Physics at the American Institute of Physics. He's a nuclear historian. Linda's also a nuclear historian. She's a PhD student at Oregon State University.
Welcome to the show, Alex and Linda. I want to start off with the atomic age. What is the atomic age exactly, and when did it start? Alex, if you can take us into the atomic age.
So one way to talk about a technological age is to talk about how people self-identify which technologies are defining themselves at any one time. So if we go back to, say, the 19th century, if you search over what words are being used by people in books or articles or things, they describe themselves as living in predominantly the machine age. Machines are what they see as dominating and changing the world that they are living in. And that actually goes on for quite a long time, all the way up into the period of the 1940s, well in the 20th century. In 1945, suddenly people start talking about the atomic age, and they're talking about obviously the atomic bomb as being something which has set the character and changed the nature of the world that they're in such a way that their entire era is defined by it. Now, around the 1950s, this switches to the nuclear age, and this is part of a sort of general terminology switch from atomic to nuclear. It also has to do with a focus away from just fission weapons, but also onto civilian nuclear power, but also onto a diversified arsenal of nuclear weapons that is well beyond the just strict atomic bombs.
I really think that you can look at the discovery of radiation and X-rays also is kind of a beginning of this time where something that was invisible becomes understood as something that actually can change the world. The whole idea of having X-rays so you could see into a body had so much potential for healing. And it really was amazing, actually. When people first saw their skeletons for the first time, in fact, there's a really great photograph of Anna Bertha's hand, who was married to Röntgen, who took the first X-rays. And when she sees the picture of her hand, she says, "I see my own death," because it was such a shock to see your own skeleton. Now that's maybe a precursor of the negative side of nuclear, but on the whole, at that time, people were very excited about what they could use nuclear for cures. Actually, as early as 1896, it really took off as something that was going to be this healing hope that people had.
You have people, especially early on, when it's seen as this amazing tool, both for science and for medicine. But very quickly, even by the 1920s, when you have the radium girls, you have evidences that there's going to be a darker underbelly to this, that there's hazards associated as well. And after the bomb, of course, that becomes an explicit part of how people talk about it, this double-bladed sword, this thing that can it's either going to be the salvation of mankind or the ruin of mankind. There's no sort of in-between position allowed. You either have to be all or nothing. So that's kind of, just to wrap up with the context of it, all of our, whenever people realize that technology is in some way affecting or disrupting or changing, there's always a downside. There's always somebody who's getting thrown under the train while you're also celebrating that the train has opened up lots of possibilities.
So how does the fiction of that time address that? I know with the zombie show, we looked at a lot of the fiction that really goes around the idea of epidemics. What would have been the equivalent in the nuclear age?
Well, going to the earlier literature, I think the novel that most people think about, the first one that comes to mind is H.G. Wells' The World Set Free. But there was actually lots of other novels and fiction pieces that were written that anticipated not only the making of a nuclear weapon, but some sort of atomic powers. I think a lot of them definitely encapsulate the hope but most of them are dystopian.
What was the promise of the nuclear age, Alex?
If we're talking about sort of the post-1945, at all times when the scientists were working on making the atomic bomb, they were thinking about the future. And one of the things they were deliberately thinking about was power reactors. Why were they thinking about this? Because they were building industrial-sized nuclear reactors to make the plutonium for the bombs that was set off in the desert in July 1945 and the bomb that was dropped in Nagasaki. And they knew that these reactors would get very hot, and in the context of the wartime, they took that and that heat and regarded it as waste and flushed it into the Columbia River. But they knew that you could probably engineer one of these things to boil water very high, and then you could use that for generating all sorts of electricity. And part of that was legitimate scientific interest in helping the world, and part of that is also absolving themselves. They were very explicit. Oppenheimer has a very famous speech he gave where it's, if the world does not get nuclear power and nuclear energy under control, and we do not do things right, people will I can't remember the exact phrasing, but people will loathe the words Los Alamos and use them as epithets. That we've opened up this box and nothing good has come out of it. And
I think that a lot of people felt that if nuclear power could be developed, not only would it produce less greenhouse gases, people were actually concerned about climate change, but they felt that one thing it would do is rapidly develop other places in the world so that there could actually be some equality. I think a lot of it was actually very heartfelt on the part of people to create a more just world.
The Fukushima accident has reinvigorated a lot of resistance to nuclear power, right at a moment when people were thinking it was going to maybe take off again and things of that nature. I think that it's important to keep in mind that even, the Fukushima accident's a horrible thing, and its causes are range from both the natural and the human. I mean, we know this from as much as we know so far. It's not just the natural disaster aspect, but the way it was managed and the way it was handled, and lots of human error on that side as well. But it's hard to know exactly what to say. The people in favor of nuclear power would rightly point out that the number of accidents that are really severe with nuclear power are much, much lower than those with many other energy sources.
The nuclear industry is often quoted as saying, and this is my article too, that a commercial reactor has never killed anyone. But in reality, if you look at the uranium miners, hundreds of them did die. And the ramifications are still being felt. And the Navajo Nation is just one example, one small place. Uranium mining's happened a lot of places. In fact, 80% of the nuclear fuel chain is on indigenous lands. So when I say nuclear fuel chain, I mean the mining, the milling, the storage, the testing of nuclear materials, and the production on indigenous lands. So these communities are being impacted. And I think this is a piece of the whole scenario that doesn't come out, even when there's an accident like Fukushima, and I'll tell you why. Because when they list Fukushima and they list the other accidents, no one, or very rarely, to be fair, does anyone ever mention the church truck accident, which actually was one of the largest releases of nuclear waste in the United States that ever happened. But it happened on the Navajo land, so it's not part of the narrative of nuclear accidents. But when
Can one be pro the wheel or anti the wheel? I mean, obviously it depends how you do it, and there are circumstances. I'm not sure we're 100% where we would like to be to be totally happy with nuclear power in terms of regulation and safety and siting issues. I mean, we cited our nuclear power plants before the theory of plate tectonics caught on. Just
As a yes or no answer, do you think nuclear is around to stay, at least for the foreseeable future? Alex?
Well, definitely not. I mean, both as a power source. I mean, but certainly as a legacy.
I would agree that unfortunately it's here as a legacy because no one knows what to do with it or how to clean it up and make it be gone. We're not able to remediate it.
And thank you both for joining us for this episode of His Chem. And we hope you will join us. We hope everyone will join us in October for our next show. And in the meantime, I think I'm the history person.
And I'm the chemistry person.
And together
we're HistChem.
His chemistry, yes. Thank you very much.